Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I'm honored to have Pete Chilcutt with me. Pete is a former North Carolina basketball player and then a 9-year NBA veteran, winning a championship with the Houston Rockets. And one of the things I think you're going to hear in his story today is how sometimes the way you envision things isn't the way that it went in reality. However, you can grow in those moments. So, Pete, thanks so much for being on today.
I appreciate it, Phil, and I would say it's more often than sometimes. It's often. It's often different than you imagine, for sure.
Yes. So, just to start with, growing up, both your parents were in the world of education. So, talk a little bit about, growing up and the balancing act of, really pursuing athletics. And also, I'm sure your parents had a pretty strict guideline on the educational side of things.
Well, Phil, to begin with, my mom was divorced when I was about 6. So my stepdad was a professor throughout all my childhood, and he taught at the University of Florida. He taught at the University of Georgia. He taught at the University of Alabama, where he settled at the end. My mom was a school teacher and a librarian throughout her whole career. My only respite from the educational side of that was when I went to visit my father in South Carolina, where I got to play basketball all summer at the YMCA. So I had kind of the best of both worlds in that sense, but I definitely saw the advantage in having parents that were in education, just because they were always around in the summer. You kind of got to take that for granted, and then you realize as you get older that that's not always the case. And I was pretty lucky to have that. And also during those summer months, I was able to get some basketball in and develop with my older brother, as we kind of went to South Carolina every summer and played consistently for my whole childhood.
I love it. Now, I myself, like you, am a basketball guy. I have an older brother, and I can tell you that there's probably not many things in my life that I've been more competitive with than being the younger brother trying to beat the older brother in an athletic event. So, talk a little bit about some of those childhood rivalries and you and your brother playing together.
Well, it's tough because he was 2 years older, which is right in that that time where we can both be at the same kind of level, physicality wise. He was always a little bit, I wouldn't say jealous, but like here I was a younger brother, and I grew up, I was taller. And he tells it to this day that I got all the basketball ability, he got all the looks, and he's not really wrong on that. He's a good-looking guy, and he was actually a really good athlete. He probably could have played D1 ball and football for sure. But let me go back a little bit to the childhood. Stories after stories, and we talk about competitive, and I think it was awesome and fun, and we look back at it, we laugh at it now, but there's some of that scarring that carries on to an adult life. Like there's still a little bit of a competitive rivalry between us. I remember when we went to the YMCA in South Carolina. We'd be sitting home. I'd have his shoe print on my face when I got home, and we don't. That was just one of the average days. We'd play basketball, we'd fight. We'd play basketball, we'd fight. But that age difference being so close to each other made it really intense. And not for lack, it really did probably help us both. Yeah. But at the same time, it was one of those things where you hear about the brothers, and sometimes some siblings don't have that, but boy did we have a competitive rivalry growing up, and it really made me kind of learn what it took to fight against somebody bigger and stronger and older than you, and help me down the road.
Absolutely. Now, as you're progressing within your basketball skill, once again, you're growing, you're tall, and you're developing, and you end up being a McDonald's All-American, which, for those folks listening that aren't overly familiar with basketball, it means you're one of the essentially 24 best high school players in the country, and you get the opportunity to play in a special game. But talk a little bit about that progression for you, from freshman year to senior year of high school. I think, a person hears that and they go, well, 4 years, how much can change? And the reality is from 14 to 17, for a boy at that age, a lot can change. So talk a little bit about the basketball progression for you.
Yeah, and I'll try to do that, and I'll try to relate to people how different it was in the youth basketball arena back in those days. No AAU teams.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, I'd go 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade. Instead of playing in any other teams, I'd go visit my dad during the summers and play pickup at the YMCA. So probably didn't develop as much as you would have these days, just because I wasn't playing as many games. I played football up until 10th grade. So I love football in Alabama, and I had an injury that kind of led me to get away from that. But I was really focused on basketball during the season for sure. But the growth part was almost astronomical when you think about where I started as a skinny little ninth grader. And the school I went to in Alabama was a private school. Private schools in Alabama in the 80s, and I hope I don't offend some people, but it was like legalized segregation because it was literally I played against a bunch of white guys, and they were
Yep.
all about 6'2". In the summer, that's where I got lucky because in the summers I go play in South Carolina and I play against everybody. But in that high school league, I was kind of limited on my growth because of the competition, and
Yeah.
it just wasn't good throughout my entire high school. So I got lucky and I developed, but I got lucky in going into my senior year when I got to go to those big basketball camps. That's how you get recruited back in the days. It was a BC camp in Georgia. It was a five-star camp up in Pittsburgh and New Jersey through Howard Garfinkel. I did the Nike ABC camp, but all that stuff kind of got pushed to the front by me developing, and I had to actually get a loan from my mom. Got a loan to get me to some of those camps, and I was unknown. I mean, literally unknown before that summer, and I went from probably June unknown to playing in five camps to getting hundreds of offers and getting Carolina on the table by August. It was a miracle. Now I look back at it, I didn't know any different or any better, but it happened so quick. It went from a parking lot or a driveway dream with my buddies to a reality in about 3 or 4 months. And you can't even relate that today because today's kids are getting recruited in the eighth grade. They're
Yeah.
playing year round. They all know how good they are. They're putting out social media reels, and there's really hard to find anybody that's not known these days because it's all out there. But very different basketball scene back in those days.
Now, for you, a person listening to this says, well, gosh, if Pete grew up in the South, why wasn't he, trying to go to Florida or a Southern school? And you had mentioned, at that time, they were just starting to have, frequent basketball games on TV. And North Carolina, having Dean Smith as a coach and being as good as they were post Michael Jordan, they were getting a lot of attention. And so that caught your eye. So talk a little bit about, the recruiting process and ending up picking North Carolina.
Yeah, my mom and my dad, they knew about Carolina just because they grew up in the South or where during their younger time. In about probably my ninth grade year, I had seen my TV was about 4 by 4 inches in black and white. I had to change the channel. I had to spin the dial like a
Yeah.
radio. But I picked up like you said, the Carolina games. I remember watching this guy named Michael Jordan, pretty good player, win the championship. I saw him come back the next year. And so that was my ninth and 10th grade year. I mean, those are very influential years for me.
Yeah.
And sure, Coach Smith was the leader of that. He was really more impressive to my parents at that point because I didn't know any better. I just knew that the athletes on the court were what I wanted to be like.
Yeah.
And it was a fun dream. In the driveway, I was Michael Jordan. My buddy was Kenny Smith. Somebody else was Brad Daugherty, and we just role played and we had fun with it. And it's crazy to think about how that really turned into a reality. But that's how it started. And people ask about what made me want to go to Carolina, and that literally was it. Watching them on TV, and sure, Alabama was close, and they had a really good program with Wimp Sanderson, and they got recruited by a bunch of other schools. But at the end of the day, the decision was made probably in the ninth grade. And so
Yeah.
when they offered me, there was really no brainer. I did go through a bunch of visits that fall, just because I probably felt like I needed to see the other schools and talk to coaches. But it was a no brainer for me.
I love it. Now, hearing this, one might assume, all right, Pete shows up, he's a McDonald's All-American, freshman year, he's competing for a starting role, but you get there and you have a very different learning experience. Like you mentioned, some of the 5-on-5 you had played was just against different caliber than what you were going to be going up against North Carolina. So talk a little about that transition, then Coach Smith's conversation with you that first year.
Yeah, sure. I roll up in campus oblivious to what I was getting myself into. My roommate my freshman year was J.R. Reed, a man-child from Virginia, National Player of the Year, #1 player. Another guy coming in was Scott Williams, a top 10 player. I was ranked somewhere in the top 20, but I was probably ranked up there because I signed with Carolina versus I deserved it.
Yeah.
I came into campus thinking that I was going to, do great things, and all of a sudden here I was. There was Joe Wolf and Dave Popson already there, and then you have these two stud freshmen. Um, it was tough. It was tough in the preseason. It was tough just getting through that first part of practice. And I remember after probably a week or two of practice, Coach Smith kind of walked up to me and uh, he was a great person and a great coach, and he really just put it on the line for me. He's like, listen, Pete. I'm not going to imitate his voice but how he spoke a little nasally. He's like, you're going to have a hard time getting on the court this year with all the guys. We had four players basically at my position. Um, I would like to recommend that you redshirt.
Yeah.
And that kind of talked about what that would mean. And it wasn't, I never even heard of that really. There was one player before me that had been non-medically redshirted in the history of Carolina. So I was going to be the second one. Um, he told me to talk to my mom about it, kind of see what we thought. And it just made sense. It made sense. I could see where I was. I could see where they were. And it made sense to just take this year to grow and have 4 more years. And so I wholeheartedly accepted that, but boy, was that a very tough year, mentally and physically for me. And I joke about today, if they had the transfer portal, I probably would have been gone. I mean, no doubt. If you talk about kids wanting to suck it up and stick it out, but gosh, there was a road where I never played at Carolina. If I didn't get better and improve. And as an 18-year-old, you can always blame the other person and say it's not you, it's them, and move on. So I'm glad it wasn't an option. And I tried my best to get better that year and work through it. But Coach Smith was so great about delivering that message and giving me the option. And then the fact, and I may be jumping ahead a little bit, but the fact that I'm so proud about and all the things I've accomplished, which by no means is legendary, but in my mind, the biggest thing that I think I'm proud of is I played once I got eligible the next year, I played in every single game at Carolina that I dressed out for, 140 games. And at that time, that was a Carolina record with myself and Rick Fox and King Rice. And I'm just proud of that because not only am I proud of what that says about me being ready to play, but what it says about Coach Smith and his ability to develop players that probably don't always deserve it. He saw something in me that probably I didn't even know I had, and put me out there every single game that I was at Carolina, and I'm really just proud of that.
Absolutely, as you should be. That's a big deal. Now, just for you on, you talked about it was a really difficult year, right? I mean, all you get to do is practice. You don't get the fun part of the game. There's probably an element of you that is wondering, did I make the right choice? Should I have taken a different scholarship option? And so, talk a bit about that, whether that was, having connections with guys on the team, whether that was support from Coach Smith or the coaching staff or from your parents to, hey, stick in there, keep going. Talk a little bit about, what led you or what motivated you to stay.
Well, I love basketball through and through, so that was a big part of it. Obviously, I was going to keep competing. Not only was the basketball part hard, I was struggling academically. We joke about it again now that my GPA was really, really low. I don't know if I'm going to put that out there what it was, but it was pretty low. I was struggling living with J.R. Reed. He was the exact opposite of my personality. Great guy, and I still friends with him today. But back then, I wasn't ready for his loud. He was loud. He was very active socially. He liked to go out when I liked to go to bed. And it was hard. In that first semester, I remember I did tell my mom that first semester, she goes, I don't know if I can stay here. Like I told her that. And she said, well, talk to the coaches. So I talked to Coach Guthridge. And Coach Guthridge gave me some great advice. He goes, it's very common what you're going through. He goes, just stick it out. I guarantee you it gets better in the spring. Yep. And then we'll talk again. And it really did. In that spring semester, it kind of turned around physically and mentally and academically. And so what I was going through is probably what a lot of freshmen go through when they go to school. And that's just, it's hard. You have to adapt. And when you hit some adversity, sometimes you want to just run away and go home. But I was glad that I obviously stayed. And I was glad for Coach Guthrie seeing that and giving me that great advice. But it was tough to get through that first semester. And then like January or February, I actually broke my finger in my left hand. So I was out for another 2 months with that. But at that point, I was back on track with my motivation. And again, the thing that carried me through all that was this: I love Carolina, but I love basketball. And no matter what, when there was a chance to go work on my game or get better, I wanted to do that. And I had a bunch of guys around me that felt the same way. We had a great group. throughout my career at Carolina of guys that just were there for one reason, that's to get better. And I happen to have, the luck to be in such a great institution where every year there's great players coming in to
Yeah.
push you to get better.
I love it. Now, speaking of some of the great guys, you've already mentioned a couple players you got to play with, but as you guys made kind of that Final Four run for your role, you had great guys like Hubert Davis, Eric Montrose was on the team, George Lynch. So, talk a bit about just the competitive part of being in a program like that, where I mean, on any given year, you've probably got two, three, four guys that are going to be going to the NBA the next year, and just how that competition breeds, hey, I got to show up with my best self today. I don't have a day off ever.
You really don't. And I mentioned, and I got lucky in the sense that the list of guys who came to visit Carolina who didn't come to Carolina would have been, I mean, like Shaq came through, Sean Kemp, J.R. Smith. I mean, guys that came through that didn't come, Christian Laettner. So that is just part of your destiny. That's what happens. But like I got lucky in that sense because I think if Shaq had come, I don't know about my 140 games. But nonetheless, when you have a great group of guys and they're all coming in, they're all Americans. George Lynch is relentless competitor. He was a year or two behind me. You had the big Montrose, that whole freshman class with him and Brian Reese and Derek Phelps and Pat Sullivan. I mean, guys always coming in, and again, there's always people coming in behind them. It's just a system of a rotating system of proving yourself and getting better. Coach Smith was big on seniority, and I think for that reason alone, I got the nod my senior year. But I think if I had not played well, he had no problem putting in a guy like Cliff Rozier, who was a stud out of Florida. And so you had to be on top of your game, and no matter what your year was. I mean, the only time where I think I had a little advantage of getting some playing time was that senior year. But then again, you had to stay in top shape to earn that.
Absolutely. Now, you talked about Coach Smith, and I think anytime a coach has as much success as he had as a coach, you sit there and you go, "What's the magic pill?" And I don't think there is necessarily any magic in it, but what are maybe one or two mantras or things that you really took away from that and said, this made me a better person, or this made me a better competitor, a better basketball player?
Well, he was very competitive himself. And there's so much. He is by far the most impactful man in my life that's ever been, and that's including my family. I think the things that I take away, and it still drives me today, and I think, unfortunately, it hits you later in life, the lessons he taught. Like sometimes it takes a while to kind of sit there and realize what a great role model he was, but he was so good how he treated people, how he treated people on the team. He made a point of treating the walk-ons and the freshmen the exact same as he treated the seniors. And of course, you're going to play more the better you are, but you're not going to disrespect the people who aren't playing. And it was an even playing field. His history of integrating that team, his history of just how he did things socially, of how he treated my family. 10 years after I left, we had, people offering my family tickets for games that they, again, it's just unbelievable the amount of things he did that you don't have to do. Handwritten letters to my mom and dad, stuff like that, Christmas cards for years. During that time frame, his kids would babysit my kids. My mom's kids when they came through Chapel Hill. Just stuff that you don't have to do as a person. That he did. It made it seem normal and ordinary. And I try to do that today. I really do. And I developed that later in life where, younger Pete would have probably balked at doing things for other people, going out of my way to go watch a kid play. And right now I'm in Raleigh and I'm training kids with basketball, and I got things going on. But like any chance that I can go see your kid play in a local middle school or high school, or go do something for their team, speak to their team, I do it. And I think about Coach Smith when I'm doing that, because it's not hurting me. It's not a big deal, but it's going to help somebody out. And I think the role model he provided for me, and this is obviously off the court stuff, has been amazing for me. And on the court, he was fiery and competitive, and he loved coaching those games where it was a tough game. Like I remember some games where it's maybe 10 seconds left in the game and it's do or die, and he's sitting in the timeout smiling like, "This is what we're playing for, fellas." And it really was like he was just a competitor. And I don't think he gets the credit for that either.
I love it. Now, as your time at North Carolina is coming to an end, once again, you've performed well, and so the NBA is the next opportunity, and you end up getting drafted in the first round of the Sacramento Kings. And so, talk a little bit about that. I mean, you're moving across the country. You know, it's another transition, right? Just like kind of senior year in high school, the freshman year in college. It's now, hey, everyone I'm going against is an NBA player, not, 5 out of the 12. It's everyone on the team. So talk a little about that transition for you, being in a new environment in, California, and that adjustment for you.
Well, I'd known about Sacramento just because of Kenny Smith had played out there after he got drafted. And I just remember, gosh, those games come on late because it was 7:30 in Cali. It was, 10:30 here.
Yeah.
I rarely ever got, once in a while I'd stay up late if I was with J.R. Reed and watching those games late. But more than often than not, I didn't get to see him play as much in Sacramento. I knew they had, back then every game was not on TV. They were never on TV.
Right.
So I never got to see him play. I had to kind of figure out where Sacramento was when I got out there and started getting into the training camp and in the preseason. And like, here I am. And as you mentioned, it's not on one hand it is, these are your idols that you're playing against, but then you realize the guys who aren't your idols will kick your butt too. Like there's just studs everywhere. I mean, not only are they really good basketball players, but they're the people who all conference. They're all Americans. They're scorers that you've never heard of. I mean, they're just all over the place with their talent. So adjusting to that and being able to compete and earn playing time is a whole nother learning curve and a whole nother process I had to go through. Sacramento was my first stop with Coach Dick Motta. Then he was fired. Then I had a Rex Hughes interim coach. Then I had a Gary St. Jean. So I had 3 coaches my first 2.5 years. And the Kings were not great. They had a really good home team. Like we played well at home. We didn't travel well. And as bad as we were, we still had some good players on our team, obviously, with Wayman Tisdale, Lionel Simmons, guys that were, playing in my position, and I got some more playing time. Eventually, by year 3, I realized, you got to find something that you do well and make an impact on the game. And for me, I like to think I was a decent rebounder and I could hit the open shot.
Yeah.
And that's what I started doing that 3rd year. And as the story goes, when you do something good enough and you finally get playing time, guess what? You become tradable. So, and that's what happened, how I got out of Sacramento. But again, I kind of had developed enough to be confident in that and realize, you can play here, but you got to do what you can do. You got to be professional, come to work every day, and you got to compete unlike you've ever done before.
Yeah. Well, and so to that point, you had talked about obviously your freshman year at North Carolina. Hey, kind of that realization, I need to get bigger, I need to get stronger. And I think if I understand correctly, one of the realizations you had in the NBA was, yeah, I'm tall. And by the way, folks, he's sitting down right now. If he was standing up, we'd have to zoom back really far. But you realize, hey, I need to be able to shoot the outside shot to get myself more playing time. So, talk a little bit about that, because I think that's something that we're talking about in the scope of basketball being, hey, you were obviously a really talented and gifted basketball player because you made it to the NBA. So a lot of people would say, oh, well, you're good to go. But what you realized is I was good enough to get here, but it's going to take a different set of skills to stay on here.
Yeah. My 6'9", 2 post moves I had at Carolina with the jump hook and the turnaround jump shot, they were great in college. And I could get to those once in a while, but that wasn't going to be my go-to here because of the size I was going against. So I was always a decent shooter, mid-range shooter in college. I shot a little bit of threes, but not much. But then I realized, obviously, hey, guess what? There's less big guys the farther away from the basket you go. And so the funny story is, my first year I hit 1 3-pointer. So I was 1 for 1. And I was like, should I never shoot again? Because I could be the only player in history never to miss a 3 in the league. And then I shot another one, and I made that. I was 2 for 2. And then I was really going to stop, and then someone threw me the ball with like a second on the shot clock, and I didn't want to shoot it, but I kind of had to, so I missed it. So then the caution went out the window, and I started shooting more threes into that 3rd year. And then I got to Houston with this guy you may have heard of called Olajuwon.
Yeah.
They seemed to double him a lot. And I realized that, hey, I had the range. It was an easy shot for me. I worked on it obviously a lot. And I became a decent 3-point shooter. I think if I had to go back in my memory. I think I finished around 38%, 36%, something from 3-point line over my career. But in Houston, I think I was over 40 1 or 2 years. I had obviously a lot of open shots with them doubling the dream, but it was a skill set that was obviously newer back then for the big guys to shoot them, but it was something I could do well. Another funny little anecdote was after I came back after we won a championship, the article in like the preseason NBA magazine was like Chilcutt's coming back and he shot 40% from 3-point line, but what's he doing out there anyway? Like it literally said that. And
Right.
I mean, so there's a skill set that wasn't appreciated, shall we
Yeah.
say. And I remember Houston did appreciate it because they had myself, they had a guy named Matt Bullard when I wasn't playing there. They've always had that one guy that could shoot the three. And now I think about today's NBA, gosh darn it, I think I was a little ahead of my time about getting some threes up because there's a whole bunch of threes being shot up these days. But developing the key is developing what you think you need to do to stay in the league, and then never being satisfied and always getting better. And eventually you're going to be aged out of it. But like as long as you can stay on top of something and make yourself valuable to a team, which I think I did throughout most of my career, that's the key.
I love it. Yeah, I think, back in the day at, 6'10", if you're outside shooting threes, they'd probably call you soft or something,
Exactly.
like, no, get inside. What are you doing out there?
Yep. Yep.
Now to that point though, you end up with the Houston Rockets, and when you're playing there, I mean, you got Elijah one, you got Robert Ory, Kenny Smith, Clyde Drexler. I mean, you're playing with a great team, and you end up winning the championship with them. But I think something that I would be interested to hear your conversation on is, to your point, you had played on teams that weren't very good. That just win losses, it just never really worked out. And then you played on a team where you won the championship. What are some of the differences as you look at it from a outside perspective of whether it's the way guys carried themselves, what they asked of their teammates, how the coaches really brought the team together? What were some of those stark differences that you saw from the outside?
Well, I'm going to oversimplify it at first.
Yeah.
Does Akeem Olajuwon?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Fair enough. Fair enough.
give any of my teams Akeem Olajuwon, and they're really good.
Yeah.
I will say that. And I saw Dream just recently at a Houston Rockets reunion, and he's still amazing. I'm pretty sure he could still do some the shake and bake he used to do. No, but seriously, I used to talk about it all the time. Back in those days, it was a little different. You needed a star for sure, and you need a really good player off of him. You need really two really good players to be good. And the Kings had the other good players. We had a Mitch Richmond. We had a Lionel Simmons. We just never had the stars.
Yeah.
And you get to all those teams I was on, we just never had the stars until we got to the Houston Rockets. And so the way, and of course, there's also other differences with how the franchises run, the type of players you're bringing in. I will say this, though, the Kings had a great group of guys. The Rockets had a great group of guys. Some of the teams that I was kind of wary about going to play for, like the Clippers, where I knew nobody, a great group of guys. So I never really had a team where the guys weren't good and didn't work hard. The franchises, not so much. There's those things you can do in a franchise, that are great and sometimes not so great, or willing to sign players and not willing to sign players. And so the Rockets were good at that, really good at that. Bringing in the right personnel, giving them the leadership of the team. And when you have a leadership of Clyde Drexler and Akeem Olajuwon, with players on the sideline like Robert Ory and Sam Cassell and Kenny Smith and Mario Elie, that's a solid base of players, but they're also really, really dedicated, hardworking players. You can't ask for more than that. And I can't say that for all my teams. Like you kind of lose some of that when you get to some of these teams who aren't so good. Sure, the talent matters, but also the players have to take some accountability for some of that too. And I mean, heck, I was on those teams too, so it's partially on me too. But the point is that the winning teams win for a reason. It's not flukes. These days, it's a little bit different with how teams are set up. But back then, it started with having a really, really good, solid star, and then building around him. And building, back then with Akeem in the post, I mean, it wasn't a secret what we were doing. It was back in the days where we threw the ball inside a little bit. Then putting the right players around him was really important.
Yeah. Now, whenever you play with, players that have had great success as individuals, I always think it's interesting to see, how they are as, lifting up their teammates. And so, I know you mentioned, hey, obviously on the court, when it went into him, he was good at reading the double team, kicking it out, sending the ball where it needed to go. But what were things that, maybe once again, similar to like Coach Smith, any leadership type things that you really took away as you look back on, getting the opportunity to play with that team?
Well, you get to a good team like that. That's good, and it is bad. I mean, there's pressure. So instantly there was pressure to perform where there wasn't really anywhere else. Like you could have a bad game with the Kings or the Pistons or any of those teams I played for, like Vancouver, and it's like, oh, just another night in loser town. But you get to the Houston team, there's pressure because heck, they just won the championship.
Yeah.
So you talk about having a standard. And I would like to say that the standard started in practice and carried over, but it wasn't really, it wasn't like you go to practice and see Akeem working his butt off. I mean, Akeem took it pretty light in practice, but when you got to the game days, there was a standard about how you're supposed to play the right way, and then hard, and then smart, and then defensively. And the leadership came from not only him, but like it came from everyone, because again, that whole team was a veteran team.
Yeah.
I think one of the younger guys was Horry, was like his fourth year.
Yeah.
But you got guys who have been around the league and settled there, but you have guys who have won championships there. And I mean, there's a huge pressure when you get on a team like that to not let those guys down. And that's the thing that I was kind of wanted to make sure that when I went out there, I was not part of the reason we weren't winning. And some of my best games were when Olajuwon was out injured. There's a back. I kind of joke around. My career high for my 2-game stretch was when Akeem was out for 2 games at Denver and at home against Dallas. I scored 25 in one and 22 the next, and then and I actually saw Rudy at this little reunion last month, and I told him the story. So I averaged over 2 games. I was averaging 23 and a half and 9 or in 10.
Yeah.
And then Rudy has a nerve to come up to me the next pregame against we're playing Portland in the pregame shoot around, and he goes, Chili, he goes, you've been playing amazing. You really deserve to start, but Olajuwon's coming back. So we're going to have to bring you off the bench. And I sat there and looked at him, and I said, you, like, what world is this a conversation in when you're having to kind of let me down easy because Olajuwon's coming back? But Rudy was that kind of guy. He was a player's coach, and he delivered that message. And I told him that story a month ago. We laughed about it because, but that was a 2-game stretch. And again, I was trying to, when he was out, I didn't want to be the reason we lost those games. And if you have that kind of mentality, no matter the game situation, you kind of always want to prove yourself. I think good things happen.
Absolutely. Now, after your time in Houston, one other stop that you had made was with the Utah Jazz. And, that Jazz team, similar to the Houston team, has a lot of, senior laden players and, a strong culture. You got Jerry Sloan as the coach, and then obviously, you've got Stockton, Hornacek, Karl Malone. And so talk a little about, when you're first going from underperforming teams to a really good team, and then when you go from being on the really good team to the next transition, I'm sure part of the reason they bring you in is, one, because you have the talent, but 2, you understand what it takes to win, right? When you're on a team like that, there's kind of this underlying, all right, this could be a good piece that we're just missing. We've got a lot of these other elements, but we just need 1 or 2 more pieces. So talk about coming into a situation like that when this time where you've already been a part of a championship culture, now you're moving into another one.
Yeah, that was actually getting in my last year, and there's some reasons why it didn't work out in Houston, and kind of going back to what I mentioned about when you're on a good team, the standard of performing. And Utah was a little bit more, as far as the practices and stuff, more serious and worked really hard in practice, and Coach Sloan didn't mess around. The talent was veterans. I mean, all those guys have been there forever. So it's the same standard, though. Like, what are you going to do now that you're here to help us and not make us go the other direction? And I didn't have a good stint there myself, confidence-wise. I kind of was lacking for some reason in some of those games. But the standard was so high that once I made a play that maybe I think actually it was like the first or second game of the season against the Lakers, I think I missed a game-tying three-pointer with like 6 seconds left. And it just bothered me, and so it kind of bothered my mentality almost for my rest of my time there. And again, so when you do well, in that situation, here's Houston. You don't do well. I get off a bus in Houston after practice when I'm with the Jazz, and Coach Sloan calls me over, and he's like, just as simple as this. He goes, Pete, we're moving in another direction. And I was like, yes, sir. And I kind of turned around, got back on the bus, went to the airport. I mean, he didn't mess around, but that's how it is. Again, that's how the league is. That would have happened in Houston if I didn't perform. So that's the thing about the NBA. And again, that was year 9. And so I was probably getting towards the end of my career. I didn't think I was at that point, but in retrospect, it was staring at me. And you got to perform in those situations. They bring you in for a reason. And if you don't meet that reason, it's a business. And I made it 6 months there, and I love that team. I mean, Karl Malone was really nice. All those guys, the vets, were great guys. But again, they wanted to win. That was the team, as you remember, they were getting into the championship and getting to the finals of the Western Conference a lot. So they didn't want to mess around, and if they saw something they thought they could improve, they did. And I was part of that, getting out of there. But that was a lesson. You kind of know, but it still kind of hurts when it happens.
Yeah. Now, similar to, playing 140 games at North Carolina, you play 9 seasons in the NBA. I mean, I don't know the statistic. We could probably look it up, but a lot of people don't make it past a rookie contract, right? I mean, that's kind of, hey, you got your rookie contract, you got those first 3 years, and then, you don't hear from them again. They're on to the next, foreign league or something like that. So for you, knowing you had 9 years, I think something that I've heard continuously as we've talked today is that ability to adapt and know your role and be willing to step into your role. And I think, once again, someone listening today is hearing that and they're thinking from a career standpoint, right? Like, hey, I want to be, this in my company, but really what the company needs is this role filled, right? And not everyone can be the leading scorer. We'd all love to be the leading scorer, right? No doubt about it. But sometimes you need to find what's that niche thing that I can do and add value to my team, to my company, and that gives longevity. So talk a little bit about that for you, having that 9-year career in the NBA and just your ability to adapt and kind of plug in where you're needed.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I came in as I wouldn't say skinny, but I was not quite at the where I needed to be physically for the NBA physically wise. My game, I had no clue. So over those first couple of years, as I mentioned, I transitioned into more of a perimeter, work on the outside. But in the league, you need to do more than just one thing. Like you can't go out there and expect to play minutes if you're just a shooter. So I took pride in my rebounding. And my numbers might not show it, but I was a pretty good rebounder for where I played. Again, I was down the perimeter a little bit. I like to rebound. I like to make good basketball plays and be that smart player on the court. I remember one of the things I'm also proud of is in Vancouver. 2 things with Vancouver. One is that I played 82 games one of those years up there, and that's, to me, that means a lot. Again, coming from and I'll tell you what, I wasn't healthy. I sprained my ankles like every other week. So I was banged up a lot, but again, I'm always the kind of guy to take me up and put me in coach, and I'm ready to go. And Coach Brian Hill is one of my favorite coaches when I was up there. He really did appreciate what I could bring to the table, and I added the same thing. So it was the outside shot, it was making the right plays, and it was rebounding decently. And again, I wasn't going to be a career starter, but I was a career guy you could bring in for 15, 20 minutes and give you some good minutes while you're spelling some of those stars. So I was proud of the fact that I lasted so long. And I think about another stat that I happen to know is I played in roughly 550 games. And that means 550 times some coach called on this kid from Alabama that had no business kind of getting to where he got, but somehow he did, and put him in the game. And I'm proud of that. Like, I don't consider my numbers eye-popping by any means, but as you mentioned, some guys don't even last past their first contract. So I'm proud of the fact that I lasted. I'm proud of the amount of time I got to spend on the courts playing those games. There was a funny stat, one game in Seattle, I think I was with either Houston or Vancouver, and I was sick, so I didn't dress out. And the guy from the newspaper said, "Did you know that this is the first game you've not dressed for? Like you had 270 games of straight dress." And I was like, I didn't even know that was a stat. Like, I didn't really kept games, so I probably would have dressed out if I'd known that. So again, I took pride in being there for the team and being able to play. And if the coach doesn't put me in, I'm going to try my best. But if he's not, I'm still on the bench ready to play. And you got to have that kind of mentality. No matter, that's like you're feeling under the weather. You're going to go to work today.
Yep.
Yeah, you should go to work today. Like, just put your boots on, go to work, do your best, come home and jump in the tub. But that's kind of the mentality is get better, work hard, do what it takes, and then be there when your number's called.
I love it. Now, we've talked a bit about some of the amazing players you played with. And there's others, Sharif Abdurrahim, Mike Bibby, Mitch Richmond, right? A lot of great players. But you also played in this interesting kind of transition decade, right? 91 to 2000. It was, the height of Michael Jordan in the NBA, kind of taking over. It was also the end of his career, and the next wave of all stars kind of taking over, the Shaqs, the Kobe's, right, the new era. So talk a little bit about some of the great players you got to play against. I know you've talked about Dennis Rodman and how difficult that was with wanting to always be rebounding. So talk a little bit about some of the great players that you played against, and maybe a couple of fun stories from that.
Yeah, those are fun conversations to have at some of these parties. Is who did I play against? I played against some of the best players I think of all time, but obviously of my time period. I played against them or with them. And we can kind of go down the list. I hope I don't miss any here, but like just unique players like Spud Webb, who was a great guy and an avid golfer, just a fun guy to be around, but he's 5'5", for God's sake. You got Mitch Richmond, who was like the Rock, who was a great player for Sacramento. Wayne Tisdale, bless his soul, who has passed away, but was just a great person as well. With his left-hand flipper, he was amazing down low. In Detroit, we kind of passed over that. I was only there for 3 months, but I played with Sean Elliott and Joe Dumars and Isaiah Thomas, Terry Mills. Guys that just were, when I grew up, were my heroes. Just watching them play. I don't know if I liked the bad boys, but gosh darn it, I sure do. Remember having respect for those guys.
Yeah.
And then obviously in Houston with the whole team with guys that were really good, with the Drexlers and Olajuwons and the guys I mentioned before. The Vancouver stop was one of my favorites. I was there for 3 years, and we love Vancouver as a city. Mike Bibby, the Sharif Abdurrahim, and one of my favorite post players is Big Country.
Big Country, right?
Yeah, no one knows where he is right now. Like, he disappeared. We joke around that he's probably on his first year's contract. He still is probably living off that money. I used to think I was frugal until I met Big Country. That man could squeeze $1 forever. So, but great guy, great post player, and just a bunch of guys in and out of there with Lee Mayberry, and just I can go down the list. But my favorite team, and I'll jump to them in a second. But Utah was also with that team you mentioned, with all those great players. Karl Malone was really hard to guard. I did that with Houston. And to play with him, and just to see his body. I remember walking out he was walking out of the room getting his body fat tested. This was 1998, 99, and it's 6.5%, and he was 265 pounds, and it was just a big muscle walking around the weight room, but with basketball skill. And the fact that he was able to kind of just keep his body in that shape and be such a dominant player was amazing. The team that I really enjoyed was my last team with the Clippers, when I kind of just bounced around that last year and ended up with them at the end of the year. And, the Lamar Odom, the Maurice Taylor, Eric Piatkowski, Michael Olowokandi, Keith Kloss. Guys that if you know basketball, you remember those guys. And terrible team, 100%, but really good group of guys, and terrible franchise. I remember the owner who got in some trouble, right, with his policies, told the coach, Jim Todd, who was the interim coach, and he said, and I'm not saying whether this is right or wrong, but he goes, Chili, I'm not going to be able to play you anymore. This is like the week left in the season. He goes, the owner wants me to play the black guy. He says, don't play Chilcutt anymore, play the black guy. And I was like, he said, if you can complain, he goes, they'll just cut you. He goes, you might as well just ride this into the sunset like I am. But that was that owner who got in some trouble with the Clippers. And I haven't even touched on the fact that with the Clippers, I got to play against Shaq, many times, but that was prime Shaq. And last year we were able to do a little tribute to him on his birthday for him scoring his career high against me. And that game is almost like a nightmare for me, because I fouled out in 19 minutes, but I think he scored 35 points on me in that 19 minutes. He was unstoppable in his prime, and amazing, and hard to guard, obviously for somebody like me, but for anybody. And the memories I take from all of that is that I could count on my one hand the guys who I thought were jerks that I played with or against. But there's a bunch of great guys that worked hard. And if you remember, most of those guys had just done what I'd done. They had a dream.
Yep.
They're not all the Elijah ones. There's the other guys that were really, really good people that just fought and chewed and clawed to get where they were and stuck it out as long as they could. And it's a dream. Like, it was a dream for all of us. And most of those guys are really, really good guys. And it was a privilege to play for those guys and play with them and against them. And I have no problem, posting that video of Shaq dunking on me. It's just a fun memory for me. Like, some people are like, why would you put that? I was like, well, because it's Shaq. It's prime Shaq. What do you want? But it was just a fun 9 years. And I'm thinking about coming out with a documentary, kind of like, why does that have to be the Jordan years? Why can't I have a documentary of my 90s? I mean, who wants to put that out there? That's must-see TV. I'm telling you.
I agree. I love it. Now, the other thing that we've talked a little bit about before we started recording was just the the history in Carolina, and obviously while you're in the NBA, you got to play with a lot of former Carolina guys. You're with George Lynch again. You had Kenny Smith, and today you're still active in Carolina hoops and around the program, and their coach was a teammate of yours. So talk a little bit about just the the family that is Carolina basketball, and obviously it's been years since you played there, but the family aspect of being a part of the program.
Well, it always has been family to me. Prior to 2 years ago, I was on the West Coast, so I moved back a couple years ago, and it's been like a rebirth for me just because I'm back in the area. I can go to these games now. I got my era is on the coaching staff with Pat Sullivan, Jeff Lebo, Hubert, guys that I played with at the same time. It's been a joy to be around here. Last year was another benefit, unfortunately, when Eric Montross passed away. There's a group of us that did the radio for the team. I got to do like a quarter of the games, and that was amazing. And I told Hubert, he's like, do you like doing that? And I was like, it's not that I don't, I love doing it, but it's just that I feel like I'm back part of what it used to be, like back part of the program. I would fly with the team and just obviously do the games, and that was a thrill for me. I enjoy being around here, going to these games, and just soaking it up. And now, the good news is, people, I think you get better the older you are. So somehow people are convinced I'm a legend, and I'm not gonna dissuade them. I was an average player who got better in my mind, and I love the Carolina family. But you look at that lineage of the Carolina players, and I mean, there are some legends on that list. I'll take it. I'm not going to argue with you, but gosh darn it, it's fun to be around. It's just a privilege to be part of that program and to still be in the area.
Absolutely. Now, I think something that can get overlooked as we talk about these fun memories is, at one point, although they were becoming memories, there was this transition in life for you, right? To go from, man, everything I've done for the last 20 years was focused on basketball, and now I'm exiting basketball. And I think for a lot of people, once again, we're talking about in the scope of basketball, but for people that could be being a parent, right? Like, you've been so focused on your kids, and now they graduate high school, they go off to college, and you're still their parent, but you just don't have as active as a role, and it can be a tough transition. But talk about that transition for you from being in the NBA and, once again, having that be a part of who you are and your identity, right? To now I'm segueing into my next season or phase of life.
Yeah. Well, it's a hard transition, and there's always that question right away: what do you want to do? And the easy choice is stay in basketball. Like, do you want to stay in the coaching? And I had that conversation with Coach Smith, and my impression of college coaches or NBA coaches, because I've seen them, is that they work a lot. Like, they're on the road a lot. They're in the office a lot. And I didn't know that I wanted to travel around the country chasing that, but I had a young family at that point. My son was probably a year and a half, 2 years old. So I told Coach Smith I didn't want to get into coaching. So then I was on my own. What are you going to do? And I had a couple choices. I like finances and money, so I would think about doing maybe some financial work. And then I had that educational background with my family, which I thought I would enjoy, especially with the summers off. But with a young family, I didn't think I could do that, just because I was in California and, again, raising a family on a teaching salary. So I did the financial thing for about 4 years as a broker, and that was just long enough to cement the fact that I did not like it. And the sales part was what I didn't like. I didn't like going out there and trying to scrounge up business. I love the idea of managing money, but I
Yep.
didn't like the other part. And I said, I'm just going to go into teaching. And so I kind of slid over in like 2006 or something, right around there. And I taught for 16 years out there. And it was the best choice I made. I had a great job where I could spend time with my family, and we made it work financially. I mean, it wasn't obvious, it wasn't awesome. I've always kind of got, I didn't want to dive into my investment and my financial money from basketball to live on. So
Yeah.
we just tried to survive,
Yeah.
and we did a pretty good job. My kids turned out great. We were pretty happy out there. But that choice about what you're going to do next, you have to find something that's going to motivate you outside, obviously, of sports. If you want to stay in sports, knock it out. There's things I could have done, but it's a hard decision, and you have to have something you're passionate about. And you hear stories all the time about guys who they buy businesses. I mean, and that could work, but that's not going to keep you always busy, and keep you motivated. So, anyways, it's different for everyone, but education was the answer for me, and I really enjoyed that.
I love it. Well, Pete, I want to say thanks so much for hopping on today and sharing your journey and all the amazing things that you've been able to accomplish. But excited to just continue to watch your journey, and you'll probably be announcing on like ESPN one of these days. Who knows what we'll be hearing you announce.
Well, I appreciate that. Our buddy, my teammate Scott Williams, has just started doing that this year. He's really good on there. I don't know. I don't know what the future holds, but again, I do basketball lessons with kids in the area. I got a couple. I got a small business I own, and I just started as a realtor. So I'm always trying to keep things on my plate, as opposed to I don't want to go golf all day. I want to be productive, so I'm always staying busy.
I love it. Well, thanks again, Pete.
All right, thank you.